three little dots. So, welcome everyone. Uh, we're here for another episode or session of Riding the Ozarks, in which I get the chance to talk to some of my new and favorite Ozark riders of one stripe or another. And today, I'm pleased that we have Stephanie Saunders here. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It's really an honor.
Oh, that's a pleasure to hear. I appreciate that. And we're here to talk about your new book, which uh, has been released, right? Is it's ready to for people to buy?
It is. It was just released 2 days ago, so hot off the press.
Bravo. I'm going to put a purchase link here into the chat window, so any of you who are watching live can leap into action at the minute you feel the urge. So, for those who will be watching later on YouTube, the same purchase link will be in the comments. So look down below the screen for a way to purchase this book. Its title is Covered Buttons, and I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the book, what it is, and um, some some thoughts that you might have on it.
Yeah. So, and again, I can't see myself, so I hope that I'm holding this in a way you can see it. Just tell me if not. But here's the novel itself. It is based in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains in the late 30s. And it tells the story, it's a coming of age story of 17-year-old Thea. And Thea is, she's graduated from eighth grade, the highest level that she could at that time. And she's kind of watching as her friends are getting married and starting families. And she's not exactly sure what she's going to do next in her life. She's helping her father raised her 2-year-old brother. Her mother's passed away in childbirth. And so her father marries a woman named Helen Smith, who brings lots of new ideas into the household, namely through books. And also with that marriage comes Betsy Smith, a kind of a gritty, fiery step grandmother who is involved with the birth control movement in the state at the time. And so that also shakes up Thea's life a bit.
Great. Stephanie, I don't want to throw you here, but we can't see your video. So
Oh
if you can
my.
check and see if your video might have got
Oh my.
disconnected or something. And there you are. Okay, you're
Does that
back.
help? Okay. Sorry.
Well, not a
Thank you.
problem. I, I about half the time I forget. There's a little button on my keyboard that turns the camera on, and I I forget to press the button about half the time, and so I sympathize. And for those of
Please
you
let me
who
know if
miss
that
it,
happens again.
here's the picture. Here's covered buttons. I'll hold it up
Thank
to my
you.
camera as well. So um, I'm curious about the title, covered buttons. Could you tell us where that comes from and what significance it has for you?
Yeah. So, with the research, is the video okay now? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So, with the research, I dive into a lot of the textile arts that were popular and still popular in our region in the Ozarks, and buttons in particular had a really important significance. Looking through some of the folklore of the time, that young girls like to collect them and trade them back and forth, wear them on chains for their necklaces and such. And there are lots of superstitions that were associated with buttons. And so that was a medium that eventually messages will get passed without giving too many spoilers, but between the friends in the novel. So.
Okay. And um, you have written about the history of fashion, clothing, textiles, and things like that. For that, in fact, I guess that's kind of your specialty as a historian, isn't it?
Yes, I'm originally a Latin Americanist, and also I write about peninsular literature as well. But my background, I kind of came to creative writing through the back door, I suppose. I have my PhD in Hispanic studies, so I've spent the last couple decades writing about literature in Latin America and Spain, and in particular the representations of sewing is something that's really, been important to me. So it's oftentimes fashion is what I write about in those representations, but really just trying to bring back the elevation of sewing in society, which is somewhat of a lost language, or one that we're losing a bit of fluency in.
We sure are now that I think about it. I had not stopped to think about that, but that's a whole sort of category of arts and abilities that are considerably neglected these days.
Truly, it's with the creation of fast fashion and now ultra fast fashion. It's kind of there's fast food now, there's ultra processed food. We're kind of going in a parallel direction there, but people, we're coming more and more distanced from that. But
Yeah,
literature, I feel like I've written specifically in the Latin American and Spanish context, but I feel like it's been more global. That there's just really been a comeback of appreciation for these slow arts, and
mhm.
protagonists that have found empowering ways to use them. So,
One of the things that I found interesting about your book is that it is really an exploration of the folklore and the artistry and the communication styles and everything of women. And it's a very woman focused book in many ways. And that's something that gets, when you think of like heroic stories and historical novels, you think of, you know, guys wielding swords and that sort of thing. And this was such a, a contrast and a turn from that conventional approach. It really, I think, is a kind of an untold story. So that was a lot of fun for me to read.
thank you. I didn't set out to the book from the beginning of writing. I began in 2013, and so it's taken lots of twists and turns along the way. I haven't concentrated all those 13 years solely to that.
Yeah,
I'm a professor as well, and I've done the academic writing, but I set out more wanting to write a, a female perspective of migration in our
mhm.
region. And there's elements in the novel, but it definitely took a turn. But I was thinking later, the last couple of days reflecting on it, I thought it's still a bit of a labor story, right? And with
It
that with
is.
work. So
Yeah, it's kind of the story of work and how work gets done and that kind of thing. We have a question in the chat box of what sort of symbolic value did buttons have at that time? Do you want to go ahead and tell us a little something about that?
yeah, so the buttons, especially for the young girls, that was the thing, that was their way of, denoting friendship and trading them back to get and forth together. What was really, it was something that was important for them. And then also there were superstitions that were associated with them. So Randolph talks a bit about that, if it was a found button or a black button, or these different levels that could be bad luck or good luck, that we think about, like, finding a penny if it's face up or face down, and that kind of sort of
Right.
thing. So yeah,
I wonder if that explains why my mother always had this giant jar of buttons.
jar buttons.
It's like we I know you are never going to use hopeless button. It's like hopeless, but she would never throw a button away. It was
Yeah,
like
almost
into the jar it would
superstition.
go every spare button. And I do remember wearing a few mismatched ones from time to time because I'd lose one, so I have to get it sewed on. I wonder if you could read a little passage for us to give people a kind of a feel for the flavor of your book.
Absolutely. And I believe I've been advised to start from the beginning. I think that's the best thing, except for I can't start from the preface of my novel. I'm going to start in chapter one because the preface involves singing. And if I sing, everybody, there's going to be an immediate exit of this interview. So we'll just go straight into the first chapter, uh, Embroidery Hoops. And this is in 1939. At the beginning of March, when the tree frogs were just starting to get together for nightly medleys, the woman from the funeral arrived at our homestead. Pa answered the door, and there was Helen Smith, a pie held out before her like a sacrificial offering. Since Ma had passed away, a troop of women had tried to woo Pa with their cooking. I wasn't surprised. Maybe I was biased, but in his early 40s, Pa's black hair and clear green eyes stood out in a crowd. He was a handsome man. I could see that even if he was my Pa. He worked hard and didn't drink or raise a hand against us. Suddenly, the smell of apples wafted in our small house. Applesauce pie, Pa's favorite. I figured that wasn't a coincidence. The pie made sense. What surprised me was that, as far as I knew, Helen came all the way to our house without an invitation. That was bold. Morning, Helen. Can I help you? Pa asked, sounding surprised as well. His tone broke my wandering thoughts. I brought you a pie, Helen said. Pa looked down at the pie, nestled in a freshly bleached and ironed dish towel in Helen's hands, with an expression like he hadn't noticed it before. The towel's embroidery stitches caught my eye. Blue backstitch of a bouquet of flowers in an angular vase. Flowers again. The stitches, a simple outline, uncommitted and lonesome, were not how I would have done them, nor Ma either. We would have filled out the whole scene with a satin stitch, making it vibrant and lush. It looked rushed and half done, though I was getting the sense that this was Helen. Her hair was the same, crawling out of her loose bun, just as it had been that humid August day at Mrs. Hatman's funeral. You sure did, Pa said as he took the pie from her. Come on in here, Helen, and Thea put on some coffee. I dried my hands on my apron and walked to the cook stove. Out of the corner of my eye, an unfamiliar scene unfolded. Pa was fixated on Helen, as he hadn't been on any woman since Ma died. In the last few months, a sense of urgency had come over Pa. He thought he needed a wife, even if he did not necessarily want one. Your Ma was a fine woman, best there was, won't ever find any better. But everybody knows you won't get married until I do, until some woman will take over and raise Jacob. How many times had he said that to me? After Ma died, my oldest brother Peter ran off in the night. Plum disappeared, except for the red button from Ma's favorite dress that he left on my pillowcase, a sign of something, but I wasn't sure of what. I always told Pa I wouldn't do the same. That was the problem, he would say. He didn't want life to pass me by on account of him. Pa might have resembled the most men in our community on how he tucked his shirt in tightly when he worked or how he preferred his meals simple. But when it came to how he saw me, I knew he was as different as he could be. Most fathers wouldn't have cared if their daughter served them. They would have even thought it a daughter's duty, maybe even a girl's reason for being born, but not Pa. Pa nodded towards the dining table. Have a seat. While I made coffee, they waited at the table, Pa studying Helen as she fidgeted in her chair. There was such an overwhelming silence that every noise I made rang out loud and clumsy. Coffee beans grinding, pots clanging, mugs clicking, water boiling. I became nervous, though I could tell this visit had nothing to do with me. Pa leaned back, but kept one arm on the table, tapping from pinky to pointer finger, bones protruding from the top of his hand. Helen fiddled with her dress, straightening it out, though there was nothing left to straighten. I felt sorry for her. Pa's gesture unnerved a person, even if they had nothing to hide.
Thank you. Very nice. Very nicely done. And it gets us right into the, one of the central actions of the story, just right like that, which is always a terrific way to open. There was a question in the chat about why you chose 1938 as the a year? Any
Yeah.
particular reason on that?
Well, this novel, it was not based on my grandmother's life. I can't say that, though. Many of the stories that she told me inspired, some of the details. So the cover is actually a picture of her. She would have been about 17 years old at the time, and she was born in 1922. And so I became really probably obsessive with trying to be very faithful to historical detail. And so poring over microfilm of newspapers and magazines and listening to recordings. And part of that was like thinking of the stories that she used to tell me. And so starting with her life in 22 and what that point would have been, adding the 17 years. So it starts the
Mhm.
preface in 38 and then it goes through 39. Almost to the term that a woman would carry a baby. So I don't know if anybody's noticed that or not, but that's kind of how I ended up organizing the
Well,
chapter.
I didn't
So
pick up on it, but now I'm going to go back and pick up on that. Uh, Another question is, did you feel the need to research the language of that era, the Ozark dialect, or however we want to describe it?
I did. And I also tried to keep that. I had to tone that down with the different versions of the novel because it
Mhm.
just to make it, I think, more readable and accessible. And so I hope I was able to kind of strike that balance a bit, but it is, can be challenging. So
It
trying to,
it sure can, and I
yeah.
wrestle with that same issue myself. In that you want to convey the dialect, but you don't really need to reproduce it. That's not the novelist's job, is not to mimic the dialect completely, because if you do, it comes across, as heavy-handed or
Mhm.
something like that. So you have to really figure out how to convey that sense of language without really over rendering it, I guess would be the word. It's a darn challenge,
It
to
is.
say the least.
It is. It very much is. Yeah, I that was one of the many edits that I kept going through and making sure
Mhm.
to, have my own voice step aside and that was something that of course I had to work on and dialect was another one for certain.
No kid, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that this was that and I don't want to give away too much of the story, but that a large or an important element is birth control movements of that particular era.
Mhm.
Well, can you fill us in on that? What's the story there?
Yeah. So in the 1930s, and I should back up a little bit to say how I even came to this. So when I was starting to focus on this novel really heavily, I was working and living in Columbus, Ohio. And I believe that now I keep much better records, especially handwritten ones of my revisions and drafts and everything. But I believe it was around 2000, I mean, 2020. So right around the pandemic, it was shortly after my grandmother passed away. But so I wasn't able to get to a lot of archival work, in person. And so I was working online and reading a lot of Dr. Blevins's books and, again, the Library of Congress and what I could get a hold of through the Butler Studies Center in Little Rock and the Arkansas Encyclopedia of Arkansas, sorry, online. And I was researching something totally different and I came across the birth control movement in the 30s. And so I got a hold of a dissertation called Better Babies by Dr. Marianne Luong, and she's located actually in Tennessee. Not very many people have written about it, and she's just done a phenomenal job as a historian uncovering this kind of unsung hero story, I would say, but of this group of women in Little Rock in the 30s that um, they were basically out on a mission to help impoverished women or women's health in the rural South. And so it was a time that the Comstock Act had been passed in 1873, stating that no material could be mailed about contraception. And that was not overturned until one package versus US in 1936. And so they began in 1931, the clinic, and it was very different from other clinics in the US because it was all volunteer based, even the physicians. These women weren't nurses, but they, volunteered with them. And part of my interest in this is I was thinking of the what if, or the how. What fascinated me the most was the letters that were sent in to the clinic that Dr. Luong has compiled, just women pouring out their hearts about their situations, many with grammatical errors and spelling errors and that sort of thing. And and they needed help, and the conditions for help were that they were married under a certain economic level or something with their health. And so my what if is I was thinking, how would someone from, for example, my grandmother's area, that were my great grandfather never drove a vehicle. He was, with a team of mules, how would they get to Little Rock? It was a big deal just to go to town, so that and that's how Betsy was born, basically. But thinking about the ways that these women could have received help and care.
Okay. That's very fascinating. When I first read that, I had assumed that it was some kind of New Deal project, but what you're talking about here is something that was a private, voluntary kind of activity
Hmm. It
that that
was,
was.
yeah.
Okay. Um, there's a question whether you had encountered any surprises during the research process, and I wonder about that. Anything that popped up for you?
Yeah, certainly this part, especially since it was such a, left turn for me because again, the very first version of this novel, half of it took place in Michigan to see how different it was because they
Oh,
were in the fruit fields, so it definitely took a turn in that way. I was some other surprises, I think looking through old newspapers and reading the world affairs at that moment and just trying to feel like what it felt like to get news in that way. Now we're so over inundated with that, really. um, and some of the things that were stressed at that moment that surprised me a bit as well, so on the
mhm.
national scene.
There was another questioner wants to know if you found in your earlier research on Hispanic societies, do they have similar kind of button culture of significance placed on buttons? Is that something
Yeah.
that's common?
That's a great question. Not that I know of, and I'll probably think of this later and say, but not exactly that I know of. It's interesting as well, something that I would have loved for it to have worked out, but it just didn't time-wise.
Oh,
Is where I live in Batesville, there was a button factory, and so there's still that used the inside of the shells, for buttons, and there was definitely an ebb and a flow during the world wars when those were more prevalent or not, but it
yeah.
just didn't work out time on the timeline, so to incorporate
Okay.
that.
Um, you grew up in Batesville, is that right? Arkansas?
I
Or
was born in Batesville. I actually grew up in Salem, Arkansas. It's a
oh, okay,
small town in Fulton County that's about 1,500 people. And
okay.
but I graduated from college here and then I moved off to Chile and Spain and Kentucky, Ohio, and many different places.
Uh-huh.
Traveled a lot before I was able to come home to the Ozarks. So
Yeah. Well, speaking as an Ozarker myself, how do you, I mean, being referred to as an Ozarks writer, carries some baggage with it. And how do you view that kind of baggage? I mean, or do you even feel that baggage? I don't know. What's your sense of things?
I hope to fill that baggage because I hope that's what is associated with me. Um, when I was in Ohio, I had an experience that we had the writer Michael Ondaatje, the Booker Prize writer. He'd come
Mhm.
and he was speaking with us, and he asked where I was from. He couldn't place my accent, and I told him Arkansas, and he said, "Oh, my two favorite poets are from Arkansas, Frank Stanford and C.D. Wright." And I was so embarrassed because I had not at that time read those writers. I had for a number of years only allowed myself to read in Spanish because I was, that was what I was dedicated to as far as novels went. And so it's really been a coming home, of
Uh-huh.
my roots and falling in love with Ozarks literature, and also wanting to make contributions. It was like I wanted my young students to be reading more female authors from Arkansas. And then it's like one of those things, well, I just need to roll up my sleeves and try to do what I can. So I hope
Oh,
I'm associated with the Ozark writer. I know
okay,
there are lots of the stereotypes that come along with that.
sure.
Um, but as far as like what our thematic is, right?
Yeah.
But I would consider it an honor. So
Well, bravo. I'm glad to hear that. A questioner was expressing a little surprise that the clinic was in Little Rock and asked, was Little Rock a particularly progressive place in the 30s or?
I
Um,
think some of it had to do with the organization. These women were forces to be reckoned with. I mean, they did so much volunteer work, and volunteer work was their job. Some of them took a lot of pride in the fact that they'd never received a salary. And so but they volunteered in a number of different areas. And so the kind of neat buy-in of this was that these were groups from different churches. There was a Jewish rabbi, that was also a supporter, a number of because it was something that the it was originally passed as called the Arkansas Eugenics Association. And that was, as Dr. Luong, she goes into great detail, but it didn't actually have the eugenics mission to it. But crazily enough, birth control was more taboo than
mhm.
the verbiage of eugenics at that time.
Uh-huh.
And so it's hard for us to even imagine. That name was very quickly, but they worked tirelessly, just kind of within the strength constraints of their society, to try to get
Okay.
help for the women.
Okay. Um, uh, you mentioned the length of time you've been working on this, first as a manuscript and now as a novel. We're a little bit running close on time, but if you could tell us a little bit about what you discovered on your way in
Yeah.
that writing journey, which I will assure you is not unique.
Yes.
That is, I can tell you how long it took for me to get my first novel to print too. It's a
Well,
story.
I think I began to listen to and delve into as many interviews as possible with writers because, again, I just studied literature, but the process of how to do it. So listening actually to interviews or reading you and I see some of that was very helpful. I went very much back to a pencil and paper with the writing process. I think I was trying to push something for a long time. And I just kept being stuck with this manuscript that looked done but was not. And so I had to break away from that. And that has been very freeing in the process. One of the things that I learned that was real, and I've heard other writers talk about this, but is how real that the characters are. Uh, when I was a when I was a junior in college, I had a Spanish literature class, and it was a writer from the early 20th century. And in it, there was a character that was speaking to the author saying, I'm more real than you are. And I thought, oh, how clever, that's really neat. And then during this process, it was something like, I realized that was very true. There was points where Betsy was taking things over, and I would have to, rein her back in. And I had one rewrite where it was some editor's notes, and I called one of my friends. I think I need to just rename this Betsy. She's taken over. So that was something really neat to learn along
Yeah.
the way.
And that's part of the joy of it too, is
Yeah.
when characters take on their own lives. Sounds like Mercer University Press was very active in the editorial process as well.
They've been a dream to work with. They really have. They've been really enthusiastic and supportive the along the way. So
Mhm.
I've been very, very fortunate to work with them.
That's good.
Yeah.
If people are inspired by your book to uh, delve further into the history of women in Arkansas or this particular movement, are there any sources out there that histories or memoirs or anything like that they could go to?
Yeah, as far as memoirs, I'm not certain that there are. I've spent some time in the local museums reading, old diaries and such of women of the era that I could, none that were published necessarily. I would say, Dr. Brooks Blevins has a number of just uh, beautiful history accounts of the Ozarks. So that's anybody interested in the area should start there. And Dr. Luong, her dissertation has not been published, but she does have a number of articles that really dive into these women's history,
Mhm.
and they're fascinating to read. So those would be the two that I would suggest as entryways.
You also mentioned the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. Is there anything
Mhm.
in there on this topic?
There are a couple of entries on this, and specifically Hilda Cornish is. I apologize, I don't think I mentioned her name, but she's the one that is, first attributed to getting this going, and she was a the daughter of German immigrants, and she did marry into a very well-off family, but she had worked as a milliner in New York and saw the working class plight, and she really did, have a heart for helping these women. So,
Well, we've got the book is now out, been published for 2 days, and so hopefully some of the chaos is over with, and you've settled into selling it. Tell us how we can get it, where is it available, and things like that. Um,
yeah. So it's available on the Mercer University Press site, through Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, Bookshop, .org, and then they're available in um, Wordsmith in Little Rock here in Batesville, and then also I have some to sell on hand as well. So if you see me around, I will have books. So yeah,
Anyone, maybe you could this summer, like people put up their tomato stands
that's right.
on the roadside in Batesville. I've resorted to such tactics from time to time. It's like-
I like that. Yeah, I'm gonna.
Well, it's a wonderful topic. Let me just say it's a really interesting subject, and I'll hold it up again for folks to see. Covered Buttons is the title of the book. If you're interested in historical fiction, particularly historical fiction with a big cast of female characters of every sort of stripe imaginable who are sort of making their own way in the world in the 1930s in Arkansas. This is a book that you should definitely check out. And I'm grateful you managed to stick with it through all that long and torturous process and get it to the rest of the world.
Well, it's been a learning experience, and I'm hooked now. I really, often writing time is at 4 or 5 in the morning when I can, you know, be able to dedicate time to it. But I look forward to it. It's been really transformative. So
Right.
I'm grateful that it's seeing the light of publication. So
Wonderful. Got something new that you're working on, or
I
have you?
do, I do,
Good,
and
good.
yeah.
Bravo. Well, we're just about out of time, so let me just say thank you to Stephanie Saunders, and thank you to everybody who joined us in the live chat. Um, and we'll be posting this to YouTube later on, so thanking the YouTube viewers in advance as you come to this video at whatever time. Check out this book. Thanks
Thank
so much,
you.
Stephanie.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.